Mr. Speaker.
Simon O'Connor.
I'm very confused by the last speech. I'm not sure what that had to do with Northland or New Zealand First transport policy. Very confusing. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to take a call for the Statutes Amendment Bill number 4, and its second reading, to also acknowledge the last speech. We were disappointed it could not be a double call, that we couldn't have got up to 18 seconds per change. But was wondering if this might be a signal of something of the government and what people are thinking. I think I can stand quite confidently as a government that has an excellent majority that the people of New Zealand are behind what National is doing, including with the Statutes Amendment Bill that we are considering tonight. Mr. Speaker, I don't sit on the Government Admin Committee. Every so often I've been subbed in from time to time. I've got the good fortune to sit on the Health Committee and the Commerce Committee, but I'm conscious that the Government Admin Committee does a lot of good work across an array of areas, and one of them is pulling things together such as the Statutes Amendment Bill. I think it's particularly good that Ruth Dyson has been the chair in the past Parliament, the 50th Parliament, and provides that continuity into this, the 51st. I think as she gave her discussion or contribution earlier, had mentioned Chris Ockenvale, who recently, I believe, turned 70. Indeed, I think it is 50. Was it 50? 50, 70, you know, we can't count. We'll have to make an amendment to that. That'll be the 34th amendment. Chris Ockenvale was the national representative at the time. He's a fine man indeed. He stepped away, of course, from Parliament, back down on the West Coast with family. But Sarah Dowie now from the national side helps lead the Government Admin Committee. So want to thank them for their work. There's been some accusations, scurrilous or otherwise, that the Statutes Amendment Bill shows somehow that the government is making lots of mistakes and errors. Statute Amendment Bills are actually quite normal in a Westminster system. They're a fairly normal protocol. In fact, if you look up the Cabinet Manual, I know other colleagues have referred to standing orders, but for those who are interested in matters constitutional, matters electoral, or just political process in general, if you turn to the Cabinet Manual, you can see that the likes of statute amendments bills like this one are a means to bring about technical changes, and usually those are quite small, not necessarily insignificant, but amendments which are required. And I think even only been here 3 and a bit years, you can see even with a robust select committee process, it's not unusual or abnormal that there's going to be small technical things that pop through, some of them just by the sheer volume of work that's coming through a committee that has to be dealt with and acknowledged, but also it's often in applying a piece of law that we begin to see elements that we did not anticipate, those unexpected, unanticipated consequences, a phrase often heard across and through this House regardless of political colour, red, green, black, yellow, purple or blue. So again, quite normal. And statute amendments bills, these are again an opportunity to make those changes in a timely fashion. And again, when you look at the Cabinet Manual, it's quite clear to ministers that if their request is more substantial or of a great urgency, they have to move fairly promptly through a different mechanism. I think the other side that we need to note around these changes, excuse me, is that it requires actually the affirmation of the whole House. In fact, it was something that Ruth Dyson had acknowledged in her speech at the start. It was something I hadn't actually understood, that it requires every member of this House to support. Now, that's not an encouragement to members of the other side to get a small headline on page 2 of the Dominion Post tomorrow to oppose this. Well, it could be page 22 if there's that many pages, to oppose, but actually this requires every member of the House of Representatives to support, and it's good so far, Mr. Speaker, to hear that everyone is in support of the bill. I do need to acknowledge one of the suggestions from an earlier contribution that had New Zealand had an upper house, a bicameral constitutional system, that we wouldn't have these bills, that somehow a House of Lords would work. I, for one, am certainly not in favour of a House of Lords, Senate or any upper house in this country. It works perfectly well in a unicameral system. But the other side, of course, the UK, which has a bicameral system, 2 houses of Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, they also have to apply statute amendment bills themselves. So it's not unusual to have this process. So I have to stress that context as we look at the amendment bill tonight. The Select Committee has obviously considered this quite closely. They've recommended several amendments, Mr. Speaker. One's around legal professional privilege. There's been some confusion around the Local Government Official Information Meetings Act and the Official Information Act of 1982. It was basically seen that, as written, it could be seen as a restriction, particularly during, excuse me, when judgments or proceedings rather in train or being contemplated. So the Select Committee has put some clarification to that. Others have talked around the official information requests. I don't think that needs to be gone into any further. There's been some changes through the Statutes Amendment Bill in the terms of local government and so forth. There were some changes around how long after a general election, I think it is 7 days, that it needs to be all summed up, tidied up, all the information presented. It seems, if I understand correctly, that didn't seem to apply to the likes of local government acts or local government elections. I think, speaking from an Auckland perspective, we have in 2016 an election to have a look at there. It's quite timely in the Statutes Amendment Bill that we make it very clear that the intention, as with general elections, that the the post-election work is done within 7 days, that also applies to local government and other forms of elections. So that was the work that came out of the Select Committee itself. There's a few others. There was another SOP that was looked at by Louisa Wall. I think it's important to acknowledge that was put forward, I understand, considered by the committee, but not seen as within the scope of this bill. I don't think that's been mentioned by others tonight, but I think it's important as we talk about the purpose of a statutes amendment bill that actually anyone in the House is able to raise its issues, in this case through the Select Committee. I wasn't there for the deliberation, so I'm not exactly sure of why it was seen out of scope. From the committee's perspective, from my own understanding of the issue, I certainly can understand why. It's also an issue that needs probably a firmer consideration and guidance rather than being part of what is a rather technical amendment bill. Look, there are a large number. I have a list of them here. I'm not going to go through them, of course. An earlier speaker alluded to a change around the birth, deaths and marriages. Sorry, the Births, Deaths, Marriages and Relationships Registration Act. Basically, if I understood it correctly, you could actually go down to the court and seek to have your name changed, but you didn't have to actually prove who you were by name or otherwise. Yeah, so a little odd there. Again, I think just a small example of how all the best clarifications from officials, work we do in Select Committee, can still miss certain technicalities, and more often than not it's when they actually hit the ground, the tyre hits the ground if you want. Not there, Mr Bennett, trying to make a reference to Transport in Northland, which has been very popular. Puhoi to Wellsford, very popular as well. Granted, a little money for Tamaki Drive would be welcome too. But look, it's just one example again. We as members of Select Committees, regardless if it's Health, Commerce, Government, Admin, wherever, do try to think through each clause, each change that's been initiated. But again, statute amendment bills often fix up those little technicalities, those little elements we hadn't considered. Another one I just want to mention, there's a change that in the Prime Minister's name around the Governor-General's Act. We made some changes recently. It just wants to clarify that the authority which sets the funding for the Governor-General also has the power to deal with things such as KiwiSaver contributions and ACC levies. If I might, Mr Spear, I just want to acknowledge the Governor-General for a private and what's the right term? Basically, there's an excellent constituent within the Tamaki and Mangakiki electorate, Sir Don Rowlands, very well known in the rowing and sporting community, also in the business community, who was awarded by the Queen a knighthood. Unfortunately, his health has deteriorated quite quickly, and His Excellency went to the hospital bed yesterday to do a private and early investiture, and I think that's just a fantastic act. So I just thought that was good. I thought I'd just put that on the record, not only for Sir Don, but also the Governor-General. Look, there's a whole array of other changes, the Heavy Engineering Research Levy Act, the Judicial Conduct Commissioners Act. There is a huge number, and I will leave that to others to speak. Mr. Speaker.